Well, welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. Well, Big Pharma finally got it in the face. They are responsible for the opioid crisis. Johnson & Johnson has been ordered to pay $500 million for aggressively marketing addictive painkillers and for its role in an epidemic that has killed tens of thousands of Americans every year. As Dale Hurd reports, this is just the beginning of our fight against Big Pharma.
The money was only a small fraction of the settlement the state of Oklahoma was seeking, but its impact on other pending lawsuits could be enormous. In the landmark ruling, the judge ordered Johnson & Johnson to pay $575 million for false and misleading marketing campaigns that led to addiction and deaths. It's the first case to hold a drug maker responsible for the devastation caused by the opioid crisis.
The opioid crisis is an imminent danger and menace to Oklahomans.
Johnson & Johnson will finally be held accountable for thousands of deaths and addiction caused by their activities.
It was an important victory for the families of opioid victims.
Nothing's going to bring my son back. But this victory allows his death to stand for something.
Gail and Craig Box testified at trial how their son Austin, as a linebacker at the University of Oklahoma, started taking painkillers after a back injury. He became addicted and died of an overdose in 2011. The state of Oklahoma's lawsuit had demanded more than $17 billion.
The company used pseudoscience and misleading information that downplayed the risks of opioids, leading to the worst man-made public nuisance our state and this country has ever seen, the opioid crisis.
Johnson & Johnson denies the claims against it and has vowed to appeal.
We have sympathy for all who suffer from substance abuse. But Johnson & Johnson did not cause the opioid abuse crisis here in Oklahoma or anywhere in this country.
The CDC says opioids and prescription drugs killed 50,000 Americans in 2017, the leading cause of injury-related deaths. 48 states and more than 1,500 local and tribal governments have suits pending against drug makers. The state of Ohio alone would like to collect billions, and the avalanche of lawsuits could bankrupt the opioid industry. Also on Monday, the Kentucky Supreme Court ruled that previously secret testimony from former Purdue Pharma president Richard Sackler and other documents about Purdue Pharma's marketing of its potent opioid painkiller OxyContin will finally be made public. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale. Well, from what I understand, Johnson & Johnson was a lesser player out of these huge drug firms that were dumping hundreds of millions of these pills into rural communities, small communities, and the effect has been devastating to the lives of people. And the main, leader of it was a guy named Sackler. His company was Purdue Pharma. That's gone into bankruptcy now. They were the leader, and the Sacklers made a huge amount of money. A lot of it donated to charitable causes. A lot of that's going back. But nevertheless, ladies and gentlemen, it is so nice to see one court standing up, but the Justice Department and others need to go aggressively after the other big pharma for what they have done to the American people. Well, in other news, a tropical storm is barreling towards Puerto Rico and is threatening to become a hurricane. John Jessup has more on this story from our CBN News Bureau.
That's right, Pat. Tropical storm Durian is moving through the Caribbean Sea, bringing heavy rainfall and gusty winds to the Lesser Antilles. AccuWeather meteorologists say the storm's now tracking toward Puerto Rico and Hispaniola by midweek and could reach hurricane-force winds by the time it reaches Puerto Rico. The island nation is still trying to recover from near total destruction in 2017 by Hurricane Maria. Forecasters say if the storm moves away from Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, it could strengthen and become a hurricane threat to southeast Florida by the weekend. Well, as Brazil scrambles to deal with out-of-control fires in the Amazon, the world's leading economic nations made an offer to help. But Brazilian officials have given a surprising response. CBN's Ephraim Graham reports.
G7 nations pledged $22 million to help Brazil fight the fires, but critics say the amount pledged is far too little. And a Brazilian official says his country is rejecting the offer, citing concerns over sovereignty. This comes as satellite monitoring agencies have spotted thousands of individual fires in the Amazon regions. The military is deploying 44,000 troops to fight the spreading fires. C-130s are dropping thousands of gallons of water, and even this Boeing 747 supertanker is attacking the flames. The fight on the ground, though, is more difficult.
The big problem this year is the number of small spots of fire, because if it was one or a few big fires, it would be easier to manage the resources. But when you have a lot of spots at the same time, it's more difficult.
This small crew of firefighters using shovels and mats against this fire, even using their feet to put it out. This man, who emerged from the jungle, demonstrates how he used his machete to battle the blaze. Many of the fires are set by farmers and loggers seeking to clear their land. Ironically, they're now the victims.
Nobody knows who is or who is not guilty for the fires. We just want to live our life.
With the Amazon producing a major portion of the world's oxygen supply, climate scientists fear the long-term impact. Officials say the fires will only increase in the coming days, with the peak of the burning season coming in September. Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
Pat, those images are just devastating.
Well, it's a shocking thing because they say the lungs of the earth, 20% of the oxygen we breathe is processed through that forest down in the Amazon, and to see it burned up, it'll be devastating to the rest of the planet. So we need to do everything we can to support President Bolsonaro in Brazil, and hopefully he'll accept all the help that's offered to him. But 22 million is just a drop in the bucket of what they need. But it is sort of ironic that the people who are suffering most are the farmers who started most of these fires. John?
Pat, President Trump is back at the White House this morning, returning home from the G7 summit in France overnight. But he made news before leaving, signaling he'd meet with his Iranian counterpart. At a joint G7 press conference with French President Emmanuel Macron Monday, Mr. Trump responded positively to Macron's suggestion of a meeting between him and Iranian President Rouhani.
I think ultimately we're going to do something. As I said, Iran is a much different country than it was 2.5 years ago.
Rouhani says he'll meet with the president, but not before he lifts economic sanctions on Iran. Meanwhile, on China trade, Trump said negotiations will resume, quote, very shortly, adding that the United States has collected more than $100 billion from the hike in tariffs and that, quote, anything is possible when asked about making a deal with China. Looking ahead to next year's G7 summit, the Trump-owned Doral property is among 12 host site locations under consideration. President Trump also said he would invite Vladimir Putin, Russian president, despite Russia being kicked out of the group after annexing Crimea. Pat, back to you.
Well, it's one of those things that, you know, I think all of us would like to see some stability in our foreign policy. We don't want a trade war with China, and we don't want to ruffle the feathers, but that thing is costing us money, and it's hitting the stock market, and it is roiling the world economic picture. And the world people, especially the financial people, need to understand what it is America wants. And when you've got a deal maker who kind of plays this game against the other game, the world doesn't quite know how to handle it, and it's making it tough. Now, there's something else that's making it tough, too. American values are shifting, and John has that story right now.
That's right, Pat. A new poll shows values considered very important 2 decades ago are now less important. 61% of 1,000 Americans polled cited patriotism as very important to them. That's down 9% from 1998. In the poll, 50% cited commitment to religion as very important, down 12 points now, and 43% put a high value on the goal of having children. That's down 16 points. Interestingly, there's a generational gap with younger Americans ranking these values lower, Pat. And yesterday we talked to an expert that said that this had a lot to do with the decay of the family.
Well, it certainly does, and it's dangerous, especially when these people want to embrace socialism and they don't understand what freedom is all about. They don't understand the sacrifices, why people were able to die to maintain the liberty we have in this nation. And the young people are willing to give that stuff up and just go for socialism. And so you've got the Bernie Sanders and others of this world who are preaching socialism, which would have horrified the last generation to realize that they're going to say, well, the government will provide all this free stuff for you. You'll get free college, you'll get free health care, you'll get the government to look after you. Well, the government cannot do what only God can do. And if we move away from that, we'll be destroyed as a people. That's very dangerous.